about cuts, we're not talking about what you usually hear in Washington about, which is a reduction in the expected increase or even a 1 or 2 point haircut on these programs. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars from the National Institutes of Health and the Housing and Urban Development Agency. So you had a big list there. I think we're talking about basically a 20% cut, maybe a little bit more than that in discretionary spending. This is unheard of. No one's ever seen anything like this. It is responsive to Donald Trump's base. It is responsive to Russ Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, basically the kinds of budgets that he used to write when he was the budget guy for the Republican Study Committee, which at the time was the extreme right-wing group in the House, and its budgets never got more than a handful of votes. So we're seeing the dream of Donald Trump to slash the federal government, to cut taxes for the wealthy, and we will see what Congress says about it. But for the time being, I think there is a clear direction of President Donald Trump to destroy as much as he can of the federal government as fast as he can.
Well, Angela, you have Politico calling these cuts unprecedented, but I mean, all four of us know these are not surprising. A lot of this is straight out of Project 2025. Russell Vought had been telegraphing that this is what they wanted to do if they came back into power. There was a playbook, and now they are running the playbook, Angelo.
Yeah, I mean, they listed all the things they're going to do. Nothing in here is even remotely, sort of from out of left field. I mean, they are getting basically everything they wanted in terms of their first wave of cuts and reductions and gutting, and that is an intentional part of the plan. The other thing, too, is that they're buoyed not just by the sort of whatever sort of confidence they have now in this whatever authoritarian bent. They're also buoyed by history and a track record. This is not the first time. I mean, in 2017, a similar thing happened in his first term. The budget had all these tax cuts in there. It was a deeply unpopular budget. Everyone's like, well, everyone's going to be mad at Trump over this. They promised that the tax cuts were going to pay for themselves. None of that came true. The only thing that came true was that rich people got a massive tax cut out of Trump's bill that wasn't funded. And yet people still walked away with the broader feeling and impression that somehow Trump is better on the economy than an alternative Democrat would be. And that to me is the scary part about this, is that they not only think that they can jam this through, history says that they probably have a pretty good track record of not just jamming it through, but getting away with it.
Well, I mean, what was interesting to me, David Jolly, is that the initial response from Republicans was not positive across the board, both because they didn't like what they perceived to be a freeze in defense spending, but also because they have to know that some of these cuts to domestic programs, David Jolly, not going to be popular in their districts.
That's right. Many of the programs that are subject to these cuts are programs that Republican members of Congress have supported and championed in the past. And look, I do think history suggests that Congress rarely just takes the president's budget and passes it. I'm not sure there's ever been a time that they've done that. And in this case, you're talking about a proposal that starts now but would not be finally disposed of. It should be by October 1, but really it's going to be this time next year before Republican Congress actually finally disposes of this. So I think the question becomes, is this a Congress that pushes back? Because history suggests not. Donald Trump has completely emasculated Republican members of Congress and the Senate. So do we see Republican members push back at all and try to add some of their touch to this budget? Do they just plan to go along with it? But I think the biggest question of all, Alicia, is does Donald Trump even care what Congress does? And one of the themes of the first 100 days is he doesn't actually care what Congress does with the budget. The violations of the Impoundment Act, a lot of these court cases are because Donald Trump has said, I don't care about congressional budget authority. So in many ways, as you say, Trump presented a statement of values, a statement of priorities, and he's probably just going to go ahead and fund or defund executive agencies at his own will in violation of current law. And I'm not sure Donald Trump actually cares now what Congress does with this. This will be a very unusual year to see what Congress does with the president's budget. I agree with you there. And John Allen, and we've watched Congress, Republicans in Congress, give over a lot of their authority, right? Give over oversight authority, give over appropriating authority. The power of the purse is their most distinct power. Does your reporting, does your sourcing match what we just heard from David Jolly? Have Republicans in Congress sort of said, he's going to do what he wants to do, so let's just take the vote and be done with it?
Well, the power of the party has replaced the power of the purse. Congress no longer defends its institutional prerogatives, or not very much. That said, I think you'll see some pushback in some areas. For example, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP. This is a program where you've got hundreds of thousands of people getting heating and cooling assistance in a variety of states. Among them, the big swing states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, all throughout the South, where you get air conditioning assistance from the LIHEAP program. That's one that's popular. I think there will be some pushback on. I think you'll see some pushback on the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities. But overall, I think Republicans are going to do their darndest to support Trump. And I think what has changed since 2017 is that you've got a Republican Party in Congress that is not only much more aligned with Trump, but very, very afraid of his base in primaries, which is the most likely way that any of them will lose. And so I think they're going to do what they can to pass what he wants and maybe make a few adjustments here and there.
So, Angela, help me understand something, which is I get politically how Donald Trump sells the investment in border security to his base. He has whipped them up. They believe that that the border is chaos. He's going to sell them on that. How does he sell them on a supposed increase to defense spending when members of his own party are saying, well, actually, we can do math, and this is not an increase to defense spending? In addition, to your point, this is how I would message it. I would say they are giving tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires, and the rest of us are going to have to figure out what we are willing to sacrifice in order to fund those tax breaks, because that is effectively what this budget boils down to.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because oftentimes that trade-off gets lost. You know, we think, well, the money will just materialize in some way. Yeah, the debt's bad, but it'll just get added to the debt. It's not going to somehow require a trade-off for me. And yet in this case, they were so very clear what the trade-off actually was. Usually they leave that part out of the budget. They don't make it clear what they're going to take away from you. In this case, they were very clear. I think the first question you asked, though, is really important in response to the current landscape, because that strange confusion and tension about the defense spending is critical. Because Trump, one of the things within the larger sort of right-wing ecosystem that obviously helps sort of have that swirling cauldron of support for Trump's narratives and false narratives and support for him is this weird. There are obviously contradictions and tensions everywhere, but one of the tensions is in defense spending. There's a traditional sort of hawkish, they want to as much defense spending as you can possibly get. And then there's another part of their coalition that is much more nationalistic, wants to look inward, much more populist, wants to butt and cut defense spending first and really take it away. And so in a strange way, this confusion actually helps them, because if you're sitting in the right-wing media right now, depending on where you tune in, that's the one place where they're saying different things. Some saying, yeah, this is really bad for defense spending because they're spending too much. Right? And some are saying the opposite. When it comes to the other things, they're all saying that there's not going to be any cuts or sacrifice. It's only waste, fraud, and abuse that they're getting rid of in Medicare and Medicaid, to the extent they ever acknowledge that. But that's the part where I think it's an advantage. That's something to really hammer home, so that fracture becomes a full-blown crack.